My name is Jada, and at 32 years old, I found myself waking up in a nightmare. The Chicago wind was not just blowing outside, it was screaming, rattling the thin, frosted window panes of my studio apartment on the south side. It was 6 in the morning, and the temperature had dropped to 20 degrees below zero. Inside, I was buried under 3 blankets, my breath visible in the air because I had kept the heat low to save money. I was just drifting back into a restless sleep when a sound shattered the silence. Bang, bang, bang. The pounding on my front door was so violent, it shook the framed picture of my family off the wall. The glass shattered on the floor, a poetic foreshadowing I would appreciate only later. My heart hammered against my ribs. In this neighborhood, a knock like that at this hour usually meant a raid or a tragedy. I threw off the blankets, the freezing air biting my skin immediately. I grabbed my robe, my hands trembling as I tiptoed to the door. I pressed my eye to the peephole. It was not a raid. It was worse. Standing there was my landlord, Mr. Russo, a man who smelled perpetually of stale cigars and grease. Flanking him were 2 officers from the sheriff's department, their hands resting near their belts, their faces obscured by the steam of their own breath. I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just a crack. The hallway air was somehow colder than my apartment. Mr. Russo pushed the door open with his heavy boot, forcing me to stumble back. "Out!" he barked, not even looking me in the eye. "You are out, right now." I tightened my robe, trying to find my voice. "Mr. Russo, what are you talking about? My lease is not up for another 2 weeks. I have paid through the end of the month." Russo sneered, reaching into his thick coat pocket and pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. He tossed it onto my small kitchen table. "Emergency eviction. Violation of lease terms. Unsanitary conditions and noise complaints. We are executing the order immediately. You have 10 minutes to grab your essentials before we change the locks." I looked at the officers, then back at him. "This is illegal. I know the Chicago residential landlord and tenant ordinance. You cannot evict a tenant without a 30-day notice, especially not when the weather is life-threatening. This is a constructive eviction. I will sue you." Russo laughed, a wet, hacking sound. "Sue me with what money? I heard you lost your data entry job. I heard you are broke. And as for the noise complaints, I have 3 neighbors ready to sign affidavits saying you play loud music all night." It was a blatant lie. I lived like a ghost. I never played music. I barely watched television. But as I looked at his smug face, I realized this was not about noise. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, his eyes darting around my meager apartment. "Look, Jada, do not make this hard. Just grab your stuff and go. I have a new tenant moving in this afternoon who pays cash." He pulled out his phone to check the time, and for a split second he tilted the screen toward me. That was when I saw it. He had a text message thread open. The contact name at the top read Ebony Brooks, my sister. The most recent message sent at 5:45 a.m. read, "Just sent the 700 via Zelle. Make sure she is on the street before 8. Do not let her talk her way out of it." My stomach dropped so hard I thought I might vomit. The world tilted on its axis. This was not just a greedy landlord. This was a hit job. A hit job ordered by my own flesh and blood. My sister Ebony, the golden child, the owner of a luxury spa, the woman I had protected for years, had paid a stranger to throw me into a blizzard. I looked up at Russo. The fear in my chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. It was a cold far more dangerous than the wind outside. "I see," I said, my voice steady. Russo blinked, surprised by my sudden calm. "You see what? I see that you have already made up your mind." I walked past him, ignoring the officers, and went to my closet. I did not pack my clothes. I did not pack my shoes. I reached into the back corner behind a stack of old towels and pulled out a single battered carry-on suitcase. Inside was my laptop and a small encrypted hard drive. I zipped the bag shut. I did not look at the picture frame on the floor. I did not look at the meager furniture I had bought from Goodwill. I put on my coat, wrapped a scarf around my face, and walked to the door. You are leaving the rest, Russo asked, confused. You can keep it, I said, stepping out into the freezing hallway. Consider it a tip. As I walked out of the building and the heavy metal door slammed shut behind me, the wind hit me like a physical blow. The snow was blinding. I stood on the sidewalk, shivering, homeless and betrayed. I pulled my phone from my pocket. My fingers were numb, but I managed to dial Ebony's number. It rang twice before she picked up. I could hear the upbeat music of her gym in the background. Hello? She answered, her voice dripping with fake cheerfulness. I am outside, I said. Russo kicked me out. Oh no, she said, and I could practically hear the smirk. That is terrible, Jada. But honestly, maybe it is for the best. Mom and Dad and I were talking, and we think you have been too comfortable being mediocre. You need a push. Tough love, right? Tough love, I repeated. Exactly. Dad says you need to hit rock bottom to finally get your life together. We are doing this because we love you. Just find a shelter or something. It will build character. I looked up at the gray sky. I thought about the text message on Russo's phone. I thought about the $700. And then I thought about the secret I had been keeping from them for 5 years. Okay, Ebony, I said softly. You want rock bottom. You got it. I hung up the phone. A black SUV with tinted windows pulled up to the curb a moment later. The driver, a man in a crisp suit, stepped out and opened the rear door for me. Good morning, Ms. Brooks, he said, ignoring my old coat. We have the heating on for you. I slid into the leather seat of the Uber Black, the warmth enveloping me instantly. As we pulled away from the curb, leaving my old life in the freezing cold behind, I unlocked my phone again. But this time, I did not call family. I opened my banking app. It was time to show them what real power looked like. And it was going to cost them a lot more than $700. Mr. Russo leaned his heavy frame over my small, wobbling kitchen table to sign the final eviction notice. The scratching sound of his cheap ballpoint pen against the paper felt like a knife dragging across my skin. I opened my mouth to argue one last time, to scream about tenant rights and the dangerous weather conditions outside, but the words died in my throat. Right there, sitting on top of a pile of my unopened mail, was his cell phone. It buzzed once, a harsh vibration against the wood, and the screen lit up in the dim hallway light. I have always had sharp vision, and at that distance the text notification was clear as day. I expected it to be from his office or maybe his wife, but the name at the top of the screen made my knees weak. Ebony. My sister. I blinked, thinking the cold was playing tricks on my mind. But then the preview of the message scrolled across the lock screen. It was a digital receipt from Zelle, followed by a text that shattered my entire reality. Transfer complete, $700. Get her out now. Do not let her stay another hour. If she calls Dad, tell him she left voluntarily. Just get it done. Time seemed to stop. The freezing air in the hallway suddenly felt insignificant compared to the ice spreading through my veins. $700. I stared at the glowing screen, unable to look away. $700. That was the price tag my own sister had placed on my safety. That was what my life was worth to her. I did the math in my head instantly. $700 was less than the price of the designer heels I had bought her for her birthday last year, when I was still pretending to be struggling just to fit in. It was less than the bar tab I had quietly paid for her husband 2 weeks ago, because his card was declined. My sister, the woman whose hand I held when she was in labor, the woman I had protected from bullies in high school, had paid a stranger less than the cost of a weekend spa trip to throw me out into a polar vortex. She did not just want me out of the apartment. She wanted me broken. She wanted me on the street before I could reach out to our parents, ensuring that her narrative was the only one they heard. It was a calculated, cold-blooded hit job. Russo finished signing the paper and noticed my gaze fixed on his phone. He did not look ashamed. He did not try to hide it. He simply reached out, grabbed the device with his thick fingers, and slid it into his pocket with a smirk that made my skin crawl. Your sister is a persuasive woman. Russo grunted, tearing the pink carbon copy off the form and shoving it into my chest. She worries about you. She thinks you need a hard reset. I am just the messenger. He was not just the messenger. He was a mercenary, but he was small time. My anger shifted away from the landlord. He was just a greedy man doing a job. The real enemy was the one who shared my blood. I looked at the eviction notice in my hand. Then I looked at the closed door of the apartment that had been my sanctuary. A strange calmness washed over me. The panic vanished. The fear of being homeless evaporated. In its place, something dark and heavy settled in the pit of my stomach. I realized then that the sister I loved was dead. She died the moment she sent that $700. And the woman standing in this hallway was no longer Jada the doormat, Jada the scapegoat, Jada the failure. I looked Russo dead in the eye. I did not scream. I did not cry. I smoothed out the crumpled paper and folded it neatly into my pocket. "You are right," I said, my voice terrifyingly steady, even to my own ears. "A hard reset is exactly what this family needs." I turned away from him and walked toward the door. I knew exactly what I had to do. Ebony wanted to play games with money. She wanted to use financial leverage to control my life. She had no idea that she had just declared war on the only person in the family who actually understood how the game was played. She paid $700 to ruin me. I was about to make sure that $700 was the most expensive transaction she ever made. My fingers were numb as I swiped across the cracked screen of my phone to find her contact. The hallway was so quiet I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a stark contrast to the violence of the wind howling just on the other side of the heavy metal door. I pressed the call button and put it on speaker, holding the device with a trembling hand. It rang 3 times. Then the line opened to a blast of high-energy techno music and the rhythmic, heavy sound of someone panting. "Hey, I am in the middle of a sprint interval." Ebony's voice came through, breathless and loud. "Make it quick, Jada. My trainer is watching." I stared at the peeling paint on the hallway wall. My breath was visible in the freezing air. Meanwhile, my sister was sweating by choice in a climate-controlled Equinox gym, probably wearing an outfit that cost more than my monthly rent used to be. $700, I said. My voice was raspy from the cold. There was a pause on the other end, but the sound of the treadmill whirring did not stop. She did not even slow down. "Oh, so Russo actually did it," she huffed, letting out a short, breathy laugh. "Good for him. I told him I would pay a bonus if he got you out before breakfast." Why, I asked. Just one word. It was all I could manage without my teeth chattering. Why? Seriously, Jada, you are asking me why. The treadmill beeped as she seemingly increased the speed. Her voice became more strained but also more aggressive. "Because someone had to be the adult here. Mom and Dad and I had a long dinner last night. We talked about you. We talked about how you are 32 years old and rotting away in that shoebox apartment doing data entry for pennies. You lost your job last week, and did you even start looking for a new one? No. You are just sitting there waiting for a handout." "I have savings," I whispered, though she probably could not hear me over the music. I did not tell her that my savings had 8 zeros at the end. "You have excuses." Ebony corrected me, sharp and arrogant. "Look, I know this feels harsh. I know it is freezing outside. But this is tough love, Jada." Dad agreed with me. He said you are never going to fly if we keep letting you crawl. You need a shock to the system. You need to feel the pavement under your feet so you get hungry again. I closed my eyes. The cruelty was breathtaking. She framed her malice as charity. She honestly believed she was the hero of this story. "So you paid my landlord to make me homeless in a blizzard to help me," I clarified. "I paid for your freedom from mediocrity," she said, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. "I built a spa empire from nothing. Connor built his real estate business from nothing. We grind. We hustle. You just exist. Consider that $700 an investment in your future. Now stop crying, go find a shelter and use this anger to actually achieve something for once." She did not wait for my response. I have to go, she huffed. My cool down is starting and I am meeting Mom for brunch. Do not show up, Jada. Seriously, we want to enjoy our mimosas without your drama. Call us when you have a job. The line went dead. The techno music cut off abruptly, leaving me alone in the silence of the hallway again. I lowered the phone from my ear. She thought I was unemployed. She thought I was lazy. She thought I was broke. She had no idea that the investment she just made was about to yield a return that would bankrupt her. Tough love. I repeated the words to the empty air. Okay, Ebony. Let us see how tough you really are. The sound of Ebony's heavy breathing was replaced by a hollow thud as she placed the phone down on a hard surface. From the background noise, I immediately knew where she was. I could hear the clinking of silverware against china, the sizzling of bacon in a pan, and the low hum of the espresso machine. She was not at the gym anymore. She was at our parents' house for Sunday breakfast, the same breakfast I had been uninvited from 3 months ago because my presence was apparently too depressing for their vibe. Say hello to your daughter, Dad, Ebony said, her voice echoing slightly as if she was standing over the phone. She thinks I am a monster for evicting her. Tell her why we agreed to this. There was a pause filled only by the sound of someone chewing loudly. Then my father's voice boomed through the speaker. It was deep, authoritative, and completely void of empathy. Jada, are you there? I am here, Dad, I whispered, my teeth chattering uncontrollably as a gust of wind slammed against the hallway window. Good, Harold said. Listen to me. We are not doing this to hurt you. We are doing this because we are tired of watching you float through life like a ghost. Look at your sister. She takes action. She commands respect. You just exist. I squeezed my eyes shut. I wanted to scream that I had paid off his truck last year anonymously. I wanted to scream that the data entry job was a cover for managing a portfolio worth millions. But I stayed silent. You know the old saying, Jada. He continued, his tone shifting into that lecture mode I despised. A man builds the house, but a woman makes the home. You have no husband to build for you. You have no money to build for yourself. You are a woman without a home because you have nothing to offer one. So go to the streets. Let the cold teach you the lessons that we evidently failed to teach you. Maybe when you are hungry enough, you will finally find a man or a real career. The cruelty of his words hit me harder than the freezing temperature. He was reducing my entire existence to my marital status and my bank account. Then I heard my mother's voice. It was lighter, sharper, and cut deeper than any knife. Is she crying? Beatrice asked, sounding annoyed rather than concerned. Harold, tell her not to come here. I mean it. I have the garden club coming over tomorrow, and I do not want her negative energy infecting the house. I am not crying, Mom, I managed to choke out. Well, good, she replied, dismissive as always. Because we are celebrating Ebony's new spa location today. We do not have room for your drama. Do not bring your suitcases here, Jada. Do not bring your sob stories. Honestly, just hearing about your situation makes me break out in hives. You know I am allergic to failure. Laughter erupted in the background. It was Connor, my brother-in-law. He was laughing at my mother's joke while eating the food that my parents likely paid for. They were warm. They were full. They were together. And they were laughing at the fact that I was standing in a hallway that was rapidly dropping below 0 degrees. I understood then. This was not a family. It was a cult of status. And I was the sacrifice. I pulled the phone away from my mouth. I did not say goodbye. I did not tell them I loved them. I simply pressed the red button to end the call. The silence that followed was heavy, but for the first time that morning, it did not feel lonely. It felt like freedom. They wanted me to learn from the streets. They wanted me to stop being a ghost. Be careful what you wish for, Dad, because the ghost is gone. And the wolf is coming to blow your house down. The heavy metal door of the apartment complex slammed shut behind me with a final metallic thud that echoed in the empty street. The sound was like a prison cell closing, but for the first time in years, I was on the outside. The wind hit me instantly. It was a physical assault, a biting, freezing gale that whipped snow into my eyes and stole the breath from my lungs. Chicago in January does not forgive, and it does not negotiate. I pulled my thin thrift store scarf tighter around my face, but it was useless against the 20 below zero wind chill. The snowflakes were not soft. They were like tiny shards of glass stinging my exposed skin. I stood there on the cracked pavement gripping the handle of my single battered suitcase. My knuckles turned white not just from the cold, but from the sheer force of my grip. Down the street I saw the red taillights of the sheriff's cruiser fading into the whiteout. Mr. Russo had already retreated back into the warmth of the building, probably texting my sister to confirm the job was done. I was completely, utterly alone. A 32-year-old woman standing on a desolate sidewalk in the South Side, homeless, freezing, and rejected by every single person who was supposed to love her. My mother's words echoed in my head. "A few nights on the street will motivate you." My father's voice joined the chorus. "You have to hit rock bottom." I looked down at my boots. They were old, scuffed, and leaking melting snow. I looked at the gray sky that promised nothing but more pain. A normal person would be sobbing right now. A normal person would be falling to their knees begging God or their family for mercy. But I did not shed a single tear. The cold seemed to freeze my tear ducts shut. Or maybe the fire starting to burn in my chest was just too hot for tears to survive. I let go of the suitcase handle for a moment and reached deep into the inner pocket of my ragged coat. My hand brushed past the tear in the lining and wrapped around cool, smooth glass. I pulled it out. It was not the cracked prepaid Android phone I used to communicate with my family. It was the latest iPhone Pro Max fully unlocked with a titanium case. The screen glowed bright and sharp against the gloom of the storm. It was a device that cost more than 3 months of rent in the building I had just been kicked out of. I wiped a snowflake off the screen. I did not open my contacts. I did not call a shelter. I did not look for a friend's couch to crash on. I opened the Uber app. My thumb hovered over the options. I ignored the Uber Pool. I ignored the standard Uber X. I scrolled all the way to the bottom to the premium options that the old Jada, the data entry clerk Jada, would never even look at. I selected Uber Black. Destination: the Peninsula Hotel, North Michigan Avenue. The app calculated the fare. $120 due to surge pricing. I did not flinch, I did not hesitate. I tapped confirm. To my family, $120 was a crisis. To the woman holding the phone, it was a rounding error. 2 minutes later, a sleek black Cadillac Escalade turned the corner, its LED headlights cutting through the swirling snow like a predator in deep water. The contrast was almost comical. A luxury vehicle pulling up to a crumbling curb to pick up a woman who looked like a beggar. The driver rolled down the window, looking confused and hesitant. He scanned the empty street, assuming there must be a mistake. "Ms. Brooks?" he asked, eyeing my ragged coat with suspicion. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and walked toward the car. I did not look back at the building. I did not look back at the life I was leaving behind. I met the driver's eyes with a gaze that could have cut glass. "Open the trunk, please," I said, my voice calm and commanding. It is freezing out here. As I climbed into the heated leatherback seat and the door sealed out the howling wind, I allowed myself a small, cold smile. The streets had taught me a lesson just like my father wanted. But the lesson was not humility. The lesson was that it was time to stop pretending. The masquerade was over. The bell above the door jingled a cheerful announcement that felt like a mockery of my situation. I dragged my heavy wet suitcase into the Starbucks on 35th Street. It was not the kind of coffee shop where people brought MacBooks to write screenplays or negotiate business deals. It was the kind where people came to escape the brutal Chicago wind with cracked linoleum floors and tables that were always slightly sticky. The air smelled of burnt espresso damp wool and despair. The barista, a tired teenager with purple hair and a nose ring, watched me enter with a mix of pity and annoyance. She stood behind the counter holding a rag, probably assuming I was just another homeless woman looking for a free sink to wash up in. I did not blame her. My coat was soaked through, my boots were leaving muddy puddles on the floor, and my hair was a windblown mess. I kept my head down, clutching the handle of my suitcase like a lifeline, and made a beeline for the single restroom at the back of the store. I did not ask for the code. I waited for a customer to exit and caught the door before it closed. Once inside, I engaged the deadbolt. The space was cramped and smelled faintly of bleach and stale mop water. The fluorescent light overhead hummed and flickered, illuminating the graffiti scratched into the mirror and the grime in the grout lines. I did not care. This dirty small room was about to be my dressing room. I hoisted my suitcase onto the plastic baby changing station and unzipped it. It was time to shed the skin of Jada the failure. I peeled off the soaking wet thrift store coat and let it drop to the sticky floor in a heavy heap. Next came the oversized gray sweatpants and the faded hoodie that my mother always said made me look shapeless and sad. I kicked off the leaking boots that had frozen my toes numb. Underneath the rags, I was already armored. I smoothed down the lapels of my black Tom Ford blazer. It was tailored to absolute perfection, hugging my waist and shoulders, with a precision that cost more than the car my brother-in-law drove. The fabric was sleek cool to the touch and screamed power. I adjusted the silk blouse underneath, tucking it neatly into my high-waisted trousers. I reached into the inner pocket of the suitcase and pulled out the velvet dust bag. I sat on the closed toilet lid and slid my feet into my shoes. They were not sensible winter boots. They were Christian Louboutin. So Kate pumps the black patent leather gleaming under the harsh lights, the signature red soles promising violence with every step. I stood up instantly, gaining 4 inches of height and an infinite amount of confidence. Finally, I reached into my purse and pulled out a tube of lipstick. The shade was matte red, a color I never wore around my family because they said it was too bold for someone so plain. I applied it carefully, tracing the curve of my lips with steady hands. When I capped the tube, I looked up at my reflection in the graffiti-covered mirror. The tired, shivering girl who had walked in 5 minutes ago was gone. Staring back at me was a woman who owned commercial real estate, a woman who moved millions of dollars with a single keystroke, a woman who was done apologizing. My eyes had changed too. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, predatory focus. I unlocked the bathroom door and stepped out. The change in the atmosphere was instant. The barista stopped wiping the counter, her jaw going slack. The man by the window lowered his newspaper. I did not drag my suitcase anymore. I walked with it. The click-clack of my heels on the linoleum sounded like gunshots in the quiet shop. I ignored the stares. I was no longer the victim. I was the hunter, and the hunt had just begun. The black Cadillac Escalade glided to a silent halt under the heated porte-cochere of the Peninsula Hotel on East Superior Street. The heavy glass doors of the entrance blocked out the howling wind of the blizzard, creating a barrier between the brutal Chicago winter and the golden world inside. I sat in the back seat for a moment, just breathing. My hands, which had been trembling from hypothermia an hour ago, were now resting calmly on my leather purse. I watched through the tinted window as a bellman in a pristine white uniform rushed to open my door. He did not look at me with the suspicion of the Uber driver or the disdain of my landlord. He opened the door with a flourish, bowing his head slightly. As I stepped out, my red-soled heels clicked sharply against the heated pavement. The transformation was complete. I was no longer Jada the eviction case. I was Jada Brooks, the woman who secretly owned a diversified portfolio of high-yield assets. The doorman, a man named Arthur who had worked here for 20 years and knew the secrets of every wealthy family in Chicago, broke into a genuine smile when he saw me. He did not see a homeless woman. He saw a regular guest who tipped better than the CEOs. "Welcome back, Ms. Brooks." Arthur said, his voice warm and respectful. "We have not seen you since the shareholders' meeting last month. Let me take that bag for you." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, handing him the battered suitcase that contained my entire life. "Please have it sent up to the suite." I walked through the revolving doors, and the sensory shift was so intense it almost made me dizzy. The air inside did not smell of stale cigars and grease like Mr. Russo's building. It smelled of fresh white tea, expensive timber, and thousands of fresh orchids that decorated the lobby. The lobby of the peninsula was a cathedral of wealth. The golden light from the chandeliers reflected off the polished marble floors. A massive fireplace roared in the distance, casting a cozy, flickering glow over the velvet armchairs where people were sipping afternoon tea. A pianist was playing a soft, melancholic jazz tune in the corner. It was the complete opposite of the scene I had woken up to. There was no peeling paint here, no drafts, no screaming neighbors, just a hushed, reverent silence that money buys. I walked to the reception desk. The concierge, a woman named Sarah with impeccable posture, looked up and smiled instantly. There was no need to show ID. There was no need to hand over a credit card. In this world, I was known. "Ms. Brooks," Sarah said, typing quickly on her keyboard. "We were so pleased to see your reservation come through. We have prepared the grand deluxe suite for you facing the lake just as you prefer. And we took the liberty of stocking the refrigerator with that sparkling water you like." "Thank you, Sarah," I replied, my voice steady. "It is strange, isn't it? My own mother, the woman who gave birth to me, could not stand to have me in her house because I depressed her. My sister paid $700 to erase me from her life. But here in a hotel where I paid strangers, I was treated with dignity. I was treated like I mattered." I took the keycard key from Sarah and walked toward the elevators. As the golden doors slid shut, cutting off the view of the lobby, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. The woman staring back at me was not a victim. She was a fortress. My family wanted me to hit rock bottom. They wanted me to freeze. They had no idea that while they were eating breakfast and laughing at my misfortune, I was checking into a palace. I watched the numbers on the elevator panel climb higher and higher, taking me further away from them and closer to the moment I would bring them all crashing down. The water in the deep marble-soaking tub was hot enough to turn my skin pink, but after the bone-chilling cold of the morning it felt like a baptism. I took a sip of the vintage champagne I had ordered from room service, the bubbles fizzing against my tongue. I leaned my head back against the porcelain, closing my eyes, and let the steam rise around me. But even in this paradise I could not silence the ghosts. The luxury did not make me forget. It made me remember. I drifted back 5 years. I was 27, fresh out of college, working 2 jobs, and desperate for my family's approval. I was naive. I thought love was a currency you could earn if you just sacrificed enough. That was the year Connor entered our lives. He was charming with his bright blue eyes and his stories about real estate empires. My sister Ebony was smitten, and my parents treated him like the son they never had. I remembered sitting at the kitchen table in my parents' house. Connor slid a stack of papers toward me. "It is just a formality, Jada," he had said, flashing that winning smile that hid a row of shark teeth. "I need a co-signer for the new company truck. My credit is tied up in the big development downtown. You are the only one with a clean slate. Do this for the family. Do this for Ebony." I hesitated. But then my mother chimed in from the sink. "Do not be selfish, Jada. Connor is trying to build a future for your sister. Help him out." So I signed. I signed my name on the dotted line, believing I was helping them build an empire. 3 months later, the calls started. They were not from a dealership. They were from a collection agency. I confronted Connor in the driveway. He was not driving a work truck. He was driving a brand new leased Range Rover. And he was not building a business. He was building a gambling addiction at the Riverboat Casino. When I screamed at him, holding the late notices in my hand, he did not apologize. He laughed. He took a drag of his cigarette and blew the smoke in my face. "Relax, Jada. I lost a few hands. It happens. If you are so worried about your precious credit score, why don't you pay it? You are the one who signed the paper without reading the fine print. I turned to my parents, expecting them to be furious. I expected them to defend me. Instead, my father shook his head. You should have been smarter, Jada, he said. You let him take advantage of you. Now you are dragging his name through the mud with these debt collectors. Fix it. That was the moment something broke inside me. I realized that to them I was not a person. I was a resource. I was a safety net for their golden boy. I spent the next 2 years paying off Connor's debt, eating instant noodles while they went on vacations. I opened my eyes staring at the golden faucet of the hotel tub. That betrayal was the best thing that ever happened to me. It taught me to hide my assets. It taught me that if they knew I had money, they would bleed me dry and blame me for the mess. I looked at my hand, the same hand that had signed that loan 5 years ago. Now that hand controlled millions. And Connor. He was still the same gambler. He just didn't know that the house he was betting against was me, and the house always wins. The water in the tub was starting to cool, but the memory that surfaced next made my blood boil all over again. If the truck incident with Connor was the first crack in the foundation, Ebony's wedding 2 years ago was the sledgehammer that brought the whole house down. I closed my eyes, and I was back in my parents' living room. It was supposed to be a strategy meeting for the wedding, but it turned into a shakedown. Ebony was sitting on the velvet sofa, weeping dramatically into a lace handkerchief. She had found her dream venue, a historic castle on the lakefront. But there was a problem. The deposit was $50,000 and she and Connor were tapped out. Naturally, all eyes turned to me. At the time, I was working as a junior analyst, or at least that is what I told them. In reality, I had been an early adopter of cryptocurrency. I was mining Bitcoin in my college dorm room when everyone else was partying. I had bought into Ethereum when it was trading for pennies. By the time Ebony got engaged, my digital wallet was worth more than my parents' entire retirement fund. But they did not know that. They just knew I was frugal. They knew I saved every penny. Jada. My mother had said, leaning forward with that predatory look in her eyes. You have that savings account, the one you have been building since high school. You are single. You do not have children. What are you saving for? A rainy day. Well, look at your sister. It is raining on her parade. I stared at them in disbelief. They were asking me to liquidate my legitimate savings. The money I had told them was for a down payment on a modest house to pay for a party. I cannot do that, Mom, I had said quietly. That is my future. That was when the mask fell off completely. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the china rattle. You are selfish, Jada. He spat the word out like it was poison. Your sister has a chance to be happy, to have the wedding of the century, and you are hoarding money like a miser. You care more about your bank account than you care about your own flesh and blood. You are a bitter, jealous little girl who wants everyone else to be as miserable as you are. Selfish. The word echoed in my head as I sat in the hotel tub. They called me selfish for wanting to keep the money I earned, while they felt entitled to steal it for a 6-hour party. That night I went home and made a decision that saved my life. I did not give them the money. Instead, I lied. I told them I made a bad investment. I told them the market crashed and I lost it all. I told them I was broke. I watched the disappointment on their faces, not because they felt bad for me, but because the ATM had run out of cash. From that day on, I played the role perfectly. I wore old clothes. I complained about rent prices. I let them lecture me about financial responsibility while I was secretly funding seed rounds for tech startups in Silicon Valley. I became a ghost in my own life, hiding my millions behind a facade of mediocrity. It was lonely, yes, but looking back, it was necessary. If they had known the truth, if they had known I was sitting on a fortune, they would not have just asked for $50,000. They would have consumed me whole. While Jada was soaking in a marble tub across town, my family was gathered around the mahogany dining table in my parents' house in the suburbs. The contrast could not have been more violent. Outside, the wind howled and rattled the gutters, but inside, the fire roared in the stone hearth, casting a golden, cozy glow over the room. The air smelled of rosemary roasted prime rib and expensive red wine. Not the cheap stuff they usually drank, but a bottle of Cabernet they had been saving. Apparently, evicting me was a special occasion worthy of the good vintage. Connor sat at the head of the table, a spot that used to belong to my grandfather, looking like a king who had just conquered a kingdom of dirt. He swirled his wine glass, his face flushed with heat and satisfaction. He laughed, a loud barking sound that grated on the nerves. "I bet she is standing at the Greyhound bus station right now," Connor said, wiping grease from his chin with a linen napkin. "Probably trying to use those old food stamps to buy a ticket to nowhere. God, it feels good to finally have some peace and quiet without her judging eyes on us. Did you see the way she looked at my new truck last week? Like she knew something I did not. Like she was better than me." "Well, who is the loser now, Jada? You are the one freezing on a bench while I am eating steak." My sister Ebony cut into her meat with surgical precision. She did not look guilty. She looked beatific, like a saint who had just performed a miracle. She took a sip of wine and sighed, shaking her head with performative sadness. "You are being too mean, Connor," Ebony chided gently, though her eyes were cold and devoid of any real empathy. "I did not do this to hurt her. I did it to save her. She was stagnating, Mom. She was rotting in that apartment. Someone had to be the bad guy to push her out of the nest. I just gave her the push she was too cowardly to give herself. Honestly, she will thank me for this in 10 years. I practically saved her life today." My mother reached across the table and squeezed Ebony's hand, looking at her with adoration. "You are such a good sister, Ebony," Beatrice cooed. "You have always carried the weight of this family." Jada just does not understand the concept of tough love. She thinks the world owes her a living. She thinks she is too good to struggle like the rest of us. My father raised his glass, looking around the table with pride. To Ebony, he announced, his voice booming, for having the courage to do what needed to be done. And to Connor, for securing that new loan for the spa expansion. We are finally moving up in the world, unburdened by dead weight. To the future. They clinked their glasses, the crystal ringing out a clear, happy note. They ate their steak. They drank their wine. They basked in the warmth of the fire, completely unaware that the dead weight they thought they had cut loose was actually the anchor that had been keeping them from drifting into a hurricane. They celebrated their victory, oblivious to the fact that the check intended to pay for this feast was about to bounce. The arrogance in that room was palpable, thick enough to choke on. They thought they had won the war. They did not even know the enemy had just launched a nuclear missile. I sat at the mahogany desk overlooking Lake Michigan, the city lights twinkling below like a vast sea of diamonds. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the high-end heating system that kept the brutal Chicago winter at bay. It was a silence that money could buy, a peace that I had meticulously crafted, while my family believed I was destitute. I opened my sleek silver laptop. I did not open a job search website. I did not open an email to beg for an extension on a bill. I bypassed the standard browser and launched the secure terminal I used for my real work. The screen blinked to life, a cascade of green numbers charts and complex data streams that would look like gibberish to my father, but to me, they were poetry. I navigated to my primary holding account in the Cayman Islands. My heart rate did not spike. My hands did not shake. This was routine for me now. The pending transfer from the acquisition of the AI startup I had angel invested in 5 years ago, back when everyone called crypto a scam and AI a pipe dream, had finally cleared. The screen refreshed, $12,450,000. I stared at the number. 12 million. That was enough to buy Ebony's spa 20 times over. It was enough to buy the entire city block my parents lived on and evict them just for sport. To them, I was Jada, the data entry clerk, the failure who clicked buttons for $15 an hour and clipped coupons to survive. To the tech world, I was a silent partner in 3 unicorns, a whale who moved markets with a whisper. The irony was so thick I could taste it. They thought they had crushed me by taking away a cheap apartment. They thought $700 was a life-ruining amount of money. They had absolutely no concept of the titan they had just poked in the eye. My hand instinctively went to my wallet resting on the worn leather. I pulled out a small creased photograph tucked behind my driver's license. It was taken at Christmas 3 years ago. We were all smiling in front of the tree. But I remembered that day vividly. Mom had criticized my hair within 5 minutes of my arrival, and Ebony had made me sit at the kids' table because there were not enough chairs for the adults. I looked at their faces one last time. The people who claimed to love me. The people who said they wanted me to learn a lesson. The people who paid $700 to see me freeze in a blizzard. Slowly, deliberately, I tore the photo down the middle. The sound of the paper ripping was sharp and satisfying. I did not stop there. I ripped it again and again, turning their smiling faces into unrecognizable confetti. I picked up my glass of Pinot Noir, the dark red liquid swirling in the crystal goblet. I held the shredded pieces of my past over the wine and let them fall. They floated on the surface for a second, soaking up the crimson liquid like blood before sinking to the bottom. They were drowning, just like their financial future was about to drown in my revenge. I took a sip from the glass, not caring that I swallowed a piece of the paper. It tasted like victory. Cheers, family. You wanted me to hit rock bottom. But you forgot that rock bottom is where the foundation is strongest. And I'd just finished pouring the concrete for your tomb. I set the crystal glass of Pinot Noir down on the marble desk. The time for celebrating with wine was over. Now it was time for the surgery. I needed a clear head because what I was about to do required the precision of a scalpel. If I missed even one detail, my family could wiggle out of the trap. But if I did it correctly, there would be no escape. I opened a secure folder on my laptop labeled Family Liabilities. Inside was a single PDF file that I had saved 3 years ago. The file name was Brooks Family Spa Business Loan Final Signed. I double-clicked the icon and the document filled the screen. It was 60 pages of dense legal jargon, the kind of boring text that most people skim over before signing their life away. My family certainly had. I remembered the day we signed this. Ebony was too busy fantasizing about the interior design of her spa to read the fine print. My father was too busy bragging to the loan officer about his entrepreneur daughters to ask about the risks. But I had read every word, and I knew exactly where the bodies were buried. I scrolled past the first few pages, past the part where the bank agreed to lend Ebony $1.2 million to build her dream. I scrolled past the section detailing the collateral. That part always made my stomach tighten. To secure the loan, my parents had put up their house. The 4-bedroom colonial in the suburbs, the only asset they actually owned was the security deposit. If Ebony defaulted, they would be homeless. At the time, they told me not to worry. They said Ebony was a genius. They said the business was a gold mine. They needed my signature as the guarantor only because my credit score was perfect, unlike Connor's, which was in the toilet. They treated me like a formality, a signature on a page. I stopped scrolling at page 42, section 14B. I leaned in closer to the screen, my eyes scanning the paragraph I had highlighted in yellow 3 years ago. The clause was standard for high-risk business loans, but right now it looked like a death sentence. It was titled Cross-Default Due to Guarantor Instability. The legal text was dry, but the meaning was explosive. It stated clearly that if the personal guarantor, which was me, experienced a significant material adverse change in their financial standing or living situation, the lender reserved the right to declare the loan immediately due and payable. I read the specific definition of material adverse change. It included bankruptcy lawsuits and, most importantly, loss of primary residence or verified address. A cold smile spread across my face. It was almost poetic. My sister had paid $700 to evict me. She had forced me out of my primary residence to teach me a lesson about stability. In doing so, She had legally defined me as unstable in the eyes of the bank. By kicking me onto the street, Ebony had unknowingly pulled the pin on her own grenade. She had violated the terms of her own $1 million loan. She thought she was cutting off dead weight, but she was actually cutting the brake line on a speeding car. I moved my cursor over the text and highlighted the words, "Loss of primary residence." This was it. This was the smoking gun. I did not need to lie. I did not need to manipulate the system. All I had to do was tell the bank the absolute truth. I was homeless. I was unemployed. And because of that, the bank was legally obligated to protect its money by seizing hers. I sat back in the leather chair, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. The contract was not just a PDF anymore. It was an execution order, and I was about to sign it. I took a deep breath and dialed the number for the private wealth division of Chase Bank. It was a direct line bypast the automated menus and the lower-level customer service representatives. When you have 8 figures in your account, you do not wait on hold. The phone rang exactly once before it was picked up. "Good afternoon, Ms. Brooks," the smooth professional voice of Mr. Sterling answered. He was my dedicated relationship manager, a man who sent me gift baskets on my birthday and handled my transfers with white glove service. "To hear from you is a pleasant surprise. I actually just saw the deposit from the tech acquisition clear this morning. Congratulations are in order. 12 million is quite the payday." I did not return his warmth. I stared out at the frozen Lake Michigan, my reflection in the glass, looking back at me like a stranger. "Mr. Sterling, this is not a social call," I said. My voice was devoid of emotion. It was cold, hard, and precise. "I am calling to make a formal disclosure regarding my financial standing. This call is being recorded for compliance purposes, correct?" There was a pause on the other end. The shift in his tone was immediate. "Yes, Ms. Brooks, all calls are recorded. Is everything all right? I need to update my personal profile immediately." I continued, ignoring his concern. "As of 6 o'clock this morning, I have experienced a material adverse change in my circumstances. Please update my file to reflect that I have been evicted from my primary residence. I currently have no fixed address. Furthermore, please update my employment status to unemployed." Silence stretched across the line. I could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard as Sterling likely scrambled to pull up my file. "Ms. Brooks, I am looking at your portfolio right now." Sterling stammered, his composure cracking. "You have over $12 million in liquid assets in your trust. You have equity in 3 other companies. Even if you left your apartment, surely you can purchase a new home immediately. I do not understand why we would need to mark you as homeless or unstable. This seems unnecessary." "It is not unnecessary, Mr. Sterling. It is contractual." I leaned forward, my voice dropping an octave. "I am not speaking to you as Jada Brooks, the private client. I am speaking to you as the personal guarantor for the commercial loan issued to Brooks Family Spa, LLC. Look at that contract, Mr. Sterling. Look at Clause 14B. I heard the frantic typing again. A few seconds passed, then I heard a sharp intake of breath. "I see it," he whispered. "Cross default, due to guarantor instability." "Exactly," I said. "That contract states that if the guarantor loses their primary residence or becomes unemployed, the bank considers the loan high risk. It requires an immediate recall of the full principal amount. I am legally obligated to inform you that I no longer have a home. My sister paid my landlord to evict me, therefore I am fulfilling my legal duty by telling you." Sterling sounded horrified. "Ms. Brooks, if I input this status update into the system, the algorithm will automatically trigger a default on the spa loan. It will freeze their business accounts. It will seize their assets. It will demand immediate repayment of the $1.2 million. They will be bankrupt by tomorrow morning." I took a sip of my wine. "That is not my problem, Mr. Sterling. My problem is compliance. If I do not report this, I could be sued for fraud later. I am simply following the rules. Update the file, mark the guarantor as unstable, and initiate the recall." "But Ms. Brooks, do it, Sterling, now." There was a long, heavy silence, then a resigned sigh. Very well. Updating status to evicted. Updating employment to terminated. The system is flagging the commercial loan now. Notices are being generated automatically. Good, I said. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Sterling. I hung up the phone. It was done. I had just used the truth to burn their world to the ground. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence where you can practically hear the gears grinding in someone's head as they try to reconcile two completely contradictory facts. Mr. Sterling was a seasoned banker. He dealt with erratic billionaires and market crashes, but this was evidently a first for him. Ms. Brooks, are you joking? Sterling finally asked, his voice cracking slightly. I am looking at your liquidity right now. The screen is green. You have over $12 million sitting in your high-yield trust. You could buy the entire apartment building you were just evicted from with a single wire transfer. You could buy the whole city block. I took a slow sip of my wine, savoring the panic in his voice. To him, this was a glitch in the matrix. To me, it was checkmate. Mr. Sterling. Please listen to me very closely, I said, keeping my tone perfectly level. That $12 million is my private capital. It is protected by the trust structure. It is separate. We are not discussing my personal net worth. We are discussing my physical address and my employment status regarding the Brooks family spa loan. But Ms. Brooks, surely we can just update the address to the hotel, he stammered clearly, trying to find a loophole to avoid the paperwork catastrophe I was unleashing. No, I interrupted sharply. That would be fraud. I do not live here. I am a guest. My legal residence was the apartment on South 35th Street. My landlord evicted me this morning. Therefore, I have no fixed address. My family insisted that I hit rock bottom. They insisted that I face the harsh reality of the streets. So I am honoring their wishes. And as my banker, you must honor the contract. I could hear him breathing heavily. He knew I was right. He knew the regulations better than anyone. Banks do not operate on common sense. They operate on checkboxes. And I had just unticked the most important boxes on the list. Ms. Brooks, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper, do you understand what you are asking me to do? If I enter these codes, if I mark the guarantor as unstable, the system takes over. It is an automated risk protocol. I cannot stop it once it starts. It will immediately freeze the credit lines for the spa. It will send a demand for full repayment of the $1.2 million principal. It will effectively bankrupt the business by the end of the business day. I looked at my reflection in the window. I thought about Ebony laughing on the treadmill. I thought about my father telling me to learn a lesson. I understand perfectly, Mr. Sterling, I said. My family believes in accountability. They believe that actions have consequences. Who am I to deny them that experience? But they are your family, Sterling pleaded weakly. And I am your client, I countered. A client with $12 million who expects her bank to follow federal compliance laws to the letter. Are you refusing to update my file, Mr. Sterling? Because if you are knowingly maintaining false information on a federally backed loan, I might have to report that to the Oversight Committee. That was the kill shot. No banker in the world would risk their license to save a small business loan. No, Ms. Brooks, he said quickly, the fear evident in his voice. I am not refusing. I will update the file. Good, I said. Mark the guarantor as homeless. Mark the guarantor as unemployed, and activate the risk protocol immediately. I heard the heavy clack of his keyboard. It was the sound of an executioner's axe falling. It is done, Sterling said, his voice hollow. The system has flagged the loan. The default notices are being generated now. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, I said. You have been very helpful. I ended the call and set the phone down on the marble desk. It was done. The dominoes were not just falling. I had just used a bulldozer to knock them over. My sister wanted me to experience the cold. Well, I hoped she had a warm coat, because I just turned off the heat on her entire life. I disconnected the call with the bank and immediately dialed a new number. This one was not a 1-800 service line. It was a private cell phone number that belonged to Marcus Stone. Marcus was not just a lawyer, he was a weapon in a bespoke suit. We had met 3 years ago during a hostile takeover in Silicon Valley, and since then, he had been my legal shark. He answered on the first ring, his voice low and gravelly. Jada, to what do I owe the pleasure? I thought you were celebrating your exit today. I am celebrating Marcus, I said, leaning back in the leather chair and staring at the ceiling. But the celebration involves a little bit of aggressive portfolio expansion. I need you to execute a purchase for me immediately. Name it, he said. There is a commercial property at 4500 Bronzeville Avenue. It is a mixed-use building. The ground floor is currently leased to a tenant operating as Brooks Family Spa. I heard the sound of typing on his end. He was already pulling up the records. Okay, I see it, Marcus said. Class B commercial space. Owned by a holding company that is currently over-leveraged. It looks like the building is in pre-foreclosure. The landlord is behind on payments. Perfect, I said. That is exactly what I wanted to hear. Marcus, I want you to call the bank that holds the note on that building. Offer them a cash buyout of the mortgage, full value, immediate wire transfer. I want to own the debt on that building by the end of the day. There was a pause. Jada, buying a distressed commercial mortgage is messy. Why do you want this specific building? Is it an investment play? No, it is an eviction play, I replied coolly. Ah. Marcus chuckled darkly. I see. And who is the tenant you are so eager to become the landlord of? My sister, I said. The silence on the line was heavy for a second. Then Marcus let out a low whistle. Remind me never to cross you, Jada. Okay, so here is the play. We buy the note, we become the lender. Since the current landlord is in default, we foreclose on him. As the new owner, we review the tenant leases. If the tenant, your sister, is behind on rent, or if her business credit takes a hit, say, from a certain loan, default you just triggered, we can terminate her lease for breach of contract. She is behind on rent, I confirmed. My mother mentioned at Christmas that Ebony was 3 months late, but the landlord was being lenient. Well, the new landlord is not going to be lenient, Marcus said, his voice sharpening with professional excitement. I will draft the purchase agreement now. We will use the shell company JB Holdings to keep your name off the paperwork until the ink is dry. Make it happen, Marcus. I want the notice to vacate taped to her front door tomorrow morning. Consider it done. Enjoy your dinner, Jada. I hung up the phone and felt a surge of adrenaline. This was not just about getting back at them. This was about closing the circle. They used real estate to hurt me. They kicked me out of my home. Now, I was going to take their business, their pride, and their sanctuary. I was not just burning bridges anymore. I was buying the river. I replaced the receiver of the hotel phone back onto its cradle with a soft click. The order was placed. Osetra caviar blinis with creme fraiche and a bottle of Dom Perignon Vintage 2012. It was a meal that cost more than the first car I ever owned. It was a meal fit for a celebration, or perhaps a funeral. In my case, it was a little bit of both. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Magnificent Mile. Outside, the city of Chicago was disappearing into a white void. The blizzard that my sister had hoped would break me was now raging with full force. From 20 stories up, the cars looked like toys struggling in a sandbox, and the pedestrians were invisible specks fighting a losing battle against the wind. Inside the suite, however, the silence was absolute. It was not the hollow, lonely silence of my old apartment. It was the heavy, expensive silence of a fortress. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. Down there, somewhere in the chaotic whiteout, the digital signals I had just sent were traveling through the banking networks. The default notices, the freeze orders, the foreclosure demands. They were invisible missiles silently locking onto their targets. There is a specific kind of calm that comes after you finally push the button. For years I had lived in a state of constant anxiety, always waiting for the next insult, the next demand for money, the next emotional ambush. I had walked on eggshells around my family, terrified of cracking their fragile egos. But now the eggshells were crushed, the floor was cleared, and for the first time in my life I wasn't afraid of the fallout. I was the one creating it. A gentle knock at the door broke my trance. I checked the peephole. It was room service. I opened the door to find a young woman pushing a cart draped in white linen. She wheeled it into the center of the room with practiced efficiency, popping the cork on the champagne with a soft sigh rather than a loud pop. She laid out the mother-of-pearl spoon for the caviar, adjusted the silver bucket, and bowed her head. "Enjoy your evening, Ms. Brooks," she said softly before leaving. I sat down in the velvet armchair and poured myself a glass. The bubbles rose in a perfect golden chain. I took a bite of the caviar, the salty richness exploding on my tongue. It tasted like power. I looked at my phone sitting on the marble side table. It was face up, silent. The screen was dark. My sister was likely still at the spa trying to figure out why her credit card machine was declining. My brother-in-law was probably still driving his Porsche, unaware that the repo order had already been dispatched to the local towing agencies. My parents were likely finishing their dessert, oblivious to the fact that their retirement nest egg was about to be cracked open to pay for their daughter's mistakes. It was the quietest hour I had ever known. It was the deep breath before the scream. I knew that soon that phone would light up. It would vibrate. It would ring with the panicked cries of people who suddenly realized they were not the predators they thought they were. They were the prey, and I was the one holding the leash. I took another sip of champagne and watched the snow fall, counting down the seconds until their world ended. While Jada was watching the snow fall from the quiet sanctuary of her hotel suite across town, her brother-in-law Connor was living in a completely different reality. He was behind the wheel of a obsidian black Porsche Panamera Turbo, a vehicle that cost more than most people earned in a decade. The heated leather seats were cranked up to the maximum setting, creating a warm, expensive cocoon that shielded him from the brutal winter storm raging outside. In the passenger seat sat Amber, a 22-year-old bottle service girl he had met at a club 3 weeks ago. She was scrolling through Instagram, bored, popping bubblegum, while Connor talked at her, or rather talked at himself. "Babe, you should see the plans I have for the next quarter," Connor said, tapping the steering wheel with his ring-clad fingers in time to the bass of the hip-hop track playing on the Burmester sound system. "The spa is just the beginning. I am talking about franchising. I am talking about real estate development. I am going to be the king of Chicago." Amber looked up from her phone, glancing at the diamond watch on his wrist. It was a watch bought with credit card points from the business account. "But what about your wife?" she asked, her voice high and nasal. "Doesn't she run the business? She seems kinda intense." Connor threw his head back and laughed, a loud, arrogant sound that filled the car. "Ebony, please!" Ebony is a workhorse, not a visionary. She is good at managing the staff and counting towels, but the big picture, the finances, the strategy, that is all me. She does not have the stomach for the real game. She thinks she is the boss, but she is just the face. I am the brain. He merged aggressively into the left lane, cutting off a minivan without using his turn signal. He felt invincible. He felt powerful. And honestly, he continued, glancing over at Amber with a smirk. "She is gullible. She believes whatever I tell her. I told her we needed to refinance the house to expand the business, and she signed the papers without even reading them. I told her the new truck was a tax write-off. She bought it. She is desperate to keep me happy because she knows she is lucky to have me." Amber giggled, twirling a lock of her hair. "You are terrible, Connor." "I am just realistic," he shrugged. "And do not even get me started on her sister. Jada. God, what a drag." "Jada is the one you guys kicked out this morning, right?" Amber asked. "Yeah, the dead weight," Connor sneered. He gripped the leather steering wheel tighter. "For years that girl has been looking at me like I am some kind of crook. Just sitting in the corner with her cheap clothes and her judgmental eyes. Well, guess where she is now? She is probably freezing her ass off on a park bench. We finally got rid of her. He revved the engine, feeling the raw power of the car beneath him. Ebony was crying about it earlier, but I told her to toughen up. With Jada gone, there is nobody left to whisper poison in Ebony's ear. Nobody to ask questions about the accounts. It is just me and the money now. And baby, there is a lot of money. He reached over and squeezed Amber's knee. We are going to the Miracle Mile. Pick out whatever bag you want. Louis, Gucci, whatever. Put it on the black card. The business had a good month. He did not know that the black card was linked to the credit line Jada had just flagged. He did not know that the Porsche he was driving was technically collateral for a loan that was currently being recalled. He thought he was the king of the jungle. He had no idea he was driving a stolen chariot straight off a cliff. This car, he said, running his hand lovingly over the dashboard. This is the symbol, Amber. This is what success feels like. Smooth, fast, and untouchable. He pressed his foot down on the accelerator, speeding toward a shopping spree that would never happen in a car he no longer owned, spending money that was already gone. The room was so quiet that I could hear the snowflakes hitting the glass of the panoramic window. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like 1,000 tiny fingers asking to be let in. I sat perfectly still in the high-backed leather chair, my eyes locked on the glowing screen of my laptop. A single notification chime broke the silence. It was a sharp digital sound that echoed off the marble walls of the suite. It was the email from Chase Bank. The subject line was written in bold red letters that demanded attention. Urgent, confirmation of guarantor status update. I moved the cursor and clicked open the message. The text was generated by an automated compliance system, cold and devoid of humanity, just like the family I was about to dismantle. It read, Dear Ms. Brooks, you have verbally requested to update your profile to reflect a status of evicted and unemployed. Please be advised that under the terms of the Commercial Lending Agreement for Brooks Family Spa, LLC, this action constitutes a material adverse event. Confirming this status will automatically trigger the cross-default clause. The email continued with a series of warnings that would make a normal person vomit from anxiety. Warning. This will result in the immediate freezing of all business assets associated with the borrower. Warning. The full principal balance of $1.2 million will become immediately due. Warning. Foreclosure proceedings on collateralized assets, including the residential property at 12 Oakwood Drive, will commence within 48 hours. At the bottom of the screen, there was a simple box with two buttons. One said cancel. The other said confirm. I stared at the blinking cursor. This was the point of no return. Once I clicked that button, there was no taking it back. I could not call Mr. Sterling tomorrow and say it was a prank. I could not tell my parents it was a computer error. This was the nuclear option. My hand hovered over the trackpad. For a split second, a memory flashed through my mind. I saw my mother's face from this morning. I heard her voice saying, I am allergic to failure. I saw Ebony's text message on the landlord's phone. $700. They had pushed me off a cliff assuming I would hit the ground and shatter. They never imagined that I had built a parachute made of gold. They wanted me to learn what it felt like to lose everything. They wanted me to feel the panic of not knowing where I would sleep or how I would eat. I looked at the warnings on the screen again. Freeze assets, foreclosure, immediate repayment. I was not doing this out of malice, I told myself. I was doing this out of love. Tough love. The same tough love they had preached to me for 32 years. I was simply giving them the educational experience they thought was so valuable. I was the teacher now, and class was in session. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It did not reach my eyes. My eyes remained dead focused on that blue button. Goodbye, Ebony. Goodbye, Connor. Goodbye to the house I grew up in, but never felt at home in. I stiffened my finger. I did not close my eyes. I wanted to see it happen. I pressed down. Click. The screen refreshed instantly. A new message appeared in calm green letters. Status updated. Protocol activated. Notifications sent. I closed the laptop and took a sip of my champagne. The bubbles danced on my tongue. Somewhere across the city, a server farm was processing the command, sending out digital termination orders to every financial vein in my family's body. It was done. The weapon was fired. Now all I had to do was sit back and watch them bleed. The morning sun filtered through the frosted glass doors of the Brooks family spa, casting a soft, expensive glow over the polished marble floors. The air smelled of eucalyptus and lavender, masking the rot that was about to consume the business from the inside out. It was 9 in the morning and the appointment book was full. In the waiting area, Mrs. Vanderselt, the wife of a city councilman, was sipping cucumber water while waiting for her chemical peel. Ebony walked in wearing a white silk blouse and tailored trousers, looking every inch the successful entrepreneur. She was humming to herself, still riding the high from last night's dinner. She breezed past the reception desk where Sarah, the young receptionist she constantly bullied, was organizing files. "Good morning, Sarah," Ebony said without looking at her. "Make sure the steam room is actually hot today. I do not want another complaint. And get me a latte. Skim milk, no foam." She did not wait for an answer. She walked straight to the counter where a delivery driver from the pharmaceutical supplier was waiting. He had a hand truck stacked with 3 white crates. "Morning, Ms. Brooks," the driver said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I have your quarterly shipment of Botox and fillers. Total comes to $22,450. I need a signature and a swipe." Ebony smiled the smile of a woman who believes money is an infinite resource. "Of course," she said. She reached into her Prada bag and pulled out the heavy platinum American Express card. It was the business card, the one linked to the line of credit I had guaranteed. She handed it to the driver with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "Run it. And add $50 for yourself." The driver inserted the chip into the mobile terminal. Ebony turned to Mrs. Vanderselt, waving at her VIP client. "I will be right with you, darling, just handling some inventory." Beep. The sound from the machine was loud and harsh in the quiet lobby. The driver frowned. "It says declined." Ebony laughed, a short, sharp sound. "Do not be ridiculous. It is a platinum card. The chip is probably dirty. Wipe it and try again." The driver rubbed the card on his shirt and inserted it again. The seconds ticked by. Sarah stopped typing at her computer. Mrs. Vanderselt lowered her magazine. "Beep, beep." "Declined," the driver said, his voice flat. "It says contact issuer." Ebony's smile faltered. A flush of red crept up her neck. "That is impossible," she snapped, snatching the card back. "I just paid the bill last week. It must be a fraud alert because of the amount. Here, let me try." She grabbed the machine from his hand and jammed the card in with force. Her fingers were shaking slightly. She tapped the screen aggressively, bypassing the PIN entry. "Come on," she hissed under her breath. "Do not embarrass me." The machine processed for what felt like an eternity. Then the screen flashed red. A receipt printed out automatically, but it was not a confirmation. The driver leaned over and looked at the text on the receipt. His face hardened. He reached out and firmly took the machine back from her. "Ma'am," he said loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. "The code is pickup card. That means I have to take it." "What?" Ebony shrieked. "You are not taking my card. Give it back to me." "I cannot do that," the driver said, stepping back. "It is marked as stolen or insolvent. If I give it back, I lose my merchant license, and I cannot leave the product without payment." He turned to the hand truck and tilted it back. "I am taking the shipment back to the warehouse. Call your bank." "Wait!" Ebony yelled, grabbing his arm. "You cannot leave. I have clients booked for injections in an hour. This is a mistake. Just let me call my husband. He will fix this." The driver shook her hand off. "Sorry, lady. No pay, no product." He wheeled the cart around and pushed it out the door, the wheels rumbling loudly across the marble. The silence he left behind was deafening. Ebony stood frozen at the counter, her hands still outstretched. She slowly turned her head. Sarah, the receptionist, was staring at her with wide eyes and a hint of a smirk. Mrs. Vanderselt stood up, placing her glass of water on the table. "I think I will reschedule the councilman's wife," said coldly, picking up her purse. "I prefer a spa that pays its bills. It feels safer." She walked out, leaving Ebony standing alone in the center of her empire, which had suddenly turned into a cage. The smell of eucalyptus no longer felt relaxing. It smelled like failure. The engine of the Porsche Panamera Turbo purred beneath Connor like a tamed beast as he sat at the red light on Michigan Avenue. He was drumming his fingers on the leather steering wheel, still high on the adrenaline of his imaginary empire. He glanced at his reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting his sunglasses. He looked like money. He felt like a king. Beside him, Amber was applying lip gloss, oblivious to the fact that the credit card she was planning to use had already been flagged as radioactive. Suddenly, the music on the Burmester sound system cut out. It didn't fade. It just died, instantly replaced by a jarring, hollow silence. Connor frowned, tapping the touchscreen on the dashboard. "What the hell?" he muttered. "Must be a glitch." Then the engine died. The vibration that hummed through the chassis vanished. The climate control fans spun down to a stop. The heated seats began to cool. The dashboard lights flickered once and went black. "Hey," Amber complained, looking up. "Why did you turn off the car?" "It is freezing." "I did not turn it off," Connor snapped, twisting the ignition switch frantically. "It is dead. Piece of junk." He tried to restart it. Nothing. No turnover, no click. Just dead silence. Suddenly, the central infotainment screen roared back to life, but not with the navigation map or the media player. It was a bright, flashing red screen with white block letters. "Warning. Asset recovery protocol initiated. Unauthorized user." "What is going on?" Amber asked, her voice rising in panic. Connor stared at the screen, his mouth open. Below the warning, a new message scrolled across. "Lease default detected. Remote immobilization active. Please exit the vehicle immediately. Recovery team dispatched." "It is," Jada, Connor whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical punch. She guaranteed the lease. The light ahead turned green. Behind him, a line of cars began to honk. First a polite beep, then a chorus of angry blasts. Connor panicked. He grabbed the door handle and pulled. It wouldn't budge. He pulled again, harder, slamming his shoulder against the door. "Let me out," Amber screamed, clawing at her handle. "We are trapped." The car had entered total lockdown mode. The electronic locks were engaged, turning the luxury vehicle into a rolling prison cell. The honking behind them grew deafening. Suddenly, a heavy knock on the driver's side window made Connor jump. He looked up to see a Chicago police officer staring down at him, his face unamused. The officer gestured for him to roll down the window. "I can't," Connor yelled, his voice muffled by the soundproof glass. "It is locked. The electronics are dead." The officer didn't hear him. He knocked again, harder, his hand resting on his holster. "Open the window, sir. You are blocking traffic." Connor was sweating now, despite the dropping temperature in the car. He saw the officer speak into his radio. A moment later, the officer pulled out a window punch tool. "Step back," the officer mouthed. Smash! The safety glass shattered into thousands of tiny cubes, showering Connor in glittering dust. The cold wind rushed in, biting his face. Out of the car, the officer ordered, opening the door from the outside. "Officer, listen to me," Connor stammered, scrambling out onto the slushy street, his expensive Italian loafers soaking in the gray snow. "This is a mistake. My bank is just having a glitch. I can explain." The officer looked at the red screen, still flashing asset recovery on the dashboard. Then he looked at Connor's shaking hands. "The only thing you need to explain is why you are driving a vehicle that has been reported for repossession," the officer said, pulling out his handcuffs. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back. We need to verify ownership." Amber scrambled out of the passenger side, clutching her purse. "I do not know him," she yelled at the other officer who had pulled up. "I was just catching a ride. I am taking an Uber." Connor watched helplessly as his girlfriend ran away and the handcuffs clicked tight around his wrists. He stood in the middle of the street, shivering, humiliated, while the tow truck backed up toward his throne. The king had fallen, and he didn't even have a coat. The heated executive bays at the Preston Hills Country Club were a sanctuary for men like my father. Outside the glass enclosure, the Chicago winter was raging, burying the fairways in 2 feet of snow, but inside the temperature was a perfect 70 degrees. My father, Harold, stood at the tee holding his titanium driver like a scepter. He was dressed in a cashmere sweater that cost more than my first car, and he was surrounded by his peers. There was Judge Miller and the CEO of a logistics firm, men who measured worth by stock portfolios and handicaps. My father was in high spirits. He did not know that his financial neck had just been snapped. He was busy rewriting history for his audience. "You know how it is, gentlemen," Harold said, lining up his ball. "Sometimes as a parent you have to make the hard choices. We had to cut Jada off this morning. It broke my heart, really, but she was dragging the family down. She needed to learn that nothing in this world is free." Judge Miller nodded solemnly. "You did the right thing, Harold. Tough love is the only language this generation understands. Watch this drive." Harold pulled the club back, coiling his body for the swing. He felt powerful. He felt righteous. He was the patriarch who had cleaned house. Just as he began his downswing, the sharp, high-pitched whine of an electric golf cart pierced the air. It was moving fast, too fast for the polite decorum of the club. Harold faltered his club, striking the mat with a clumsy thud. The ball dribbled 3 feet and stopped. He spun around, his face flushing with irritation. Lawrence, the general manager of the club, jumped out of the cart before it had even come to a complete stop. Lawrence was usually a man of obsequious smiles and firm handshakes, but today his face was made of stone. 2 large security guards in windbreakers stood behind him. "Lawrence, what is the meaning of this?" Harold barked, trying to regain his composure. "You ruined my backswing." "Mr. Brooks, I need you to step away from the tee immediately," Lawrence said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that silenced the entire driving range. Harold laughed, a nervous, hollow sound. "Do not be ridiculous, Lawrence. I am playing with the judge. We are just getting started." "You are not playing today," Lawrence said, stepping onto the artificial turf of the bay. "In fact, you are not playing here ever again. I just received a call from our billing department. Your membership dues for this month were rejected. When we tried to run the card on file, the bank informed us that the account has been frozen due to a federal fraud investigation linked to your guarantor status." The words hung in the warm air like toxic smoke. Fraud. Investigation. Frozen. Harold's face turned a deep, violent shade of purple. He looked at Judge Miller, who was suddenly very interested in inspecting his golf gloves. He looked at the CEO, who took a distinct step away from him. "This is a mistake," Harold sputtered, veins bulging in his neck. "My daughter Jada handles the accounts. She must have made a clerical error. I will call her and have this sorted out in 5 minutes." "There is nothing to sort out," Lawrence interrupted, cutting him off without mercy. "The bank was very clear, Mr. Brooks. You are flagged as insolvent. This club has a strict policy regarding members with compromised credit. We cannot have the reputation of this establishment tarnished by associating with financial instability." Lawrence gestured to the security guards. "Please escort Mr. Brooks to his vehicle. If he does not have a vehicle, arrange for a taxi. But get him off the property now." Harold stood there, his titanium driver dangling from his limp hand. The humiliation was absolute. He had spent 30 years building this reputation. He had sacrificed his relationship with his daughter to maintain this image of wealth and control, and in less than 60 seconds, it was stripped away in front of the very people he tried so hard to impress. "I have been a member here for 20 years, Harold whispered, his voice trembling. "And now you are a trespasser," Lawrence replied, cold and final. "Goodbye, Harold." One of the guards stepped forward and gently but firmly took the golf club from his hand. The other placed a hand on his shoulder. Harold did not fight. He slumped, looking smaller and older than he ever had. As he was led away past the staring eyes of the other members, he heard Judge Miller speak behind him. "Well, that opens up a spot. Anyone want to make this a threesome?" My father walked out into the cold, leaving his dignity on the driving range mat, right next to the ball he never got to hit. The living room of the colonial house in Oakwood was supposed to be a place of refuge, a fortress against the world, but now it felt like a sinking ship. The storm outside was battering the windows with increasing violence, rattling the panes in their frames, but the noise inside was even louder. The entire family had converged back at the nest not to celebrate, but to lick their wounds. My father Harold was pacing back and forth on the Persian rug, still wearing his golf cleats, ruining the expensive wool with every angry step. His face was a map of rage and confusion. "They threw me out, Beatrice," he shouted, waving his hands. "They treated me like a vagrant in front of Judge Miller. 20 years of membership gone in 20 seconds. They said I was a credit risk. Me, a risk." My mother Beatrice sat on the velvet sofa, clutching her pearls, looking pale and terrified. She hated confrontation and she hated ugliness, and right now her life was full of both. "It must be a mistake, Harold," she whimpered. "Jada always handles the bills. She must have forgotten to update something." "Do not talk to me about Jada," Connor yelled from the hallway. He was soaking wet, shivering uncontrollably, because the tow truck driver had refused to let him wait in the cab. He marched into the room, dripping dirty slush onto the hardwood floor. "She stole my car," he screamed. "The police said the lease was in default. How can it be in default? I told her to pay it last week." Ebony was standing by the fireplace, her perfect blowout ruined by the snow, her mascara running down her cheeks. She was frantically tapping on her phone, trying to log into the business bank account, but the app kept giving her a red error message. "User locked. Contact administrator. Stop making this about you, Connor," she shrieked, throwing her phone onto the armchair. My entire inventory was repossessed in front of Mrs. Vanderselt. Do you know how humiliating that is? My credit card was cut up by a delivery driver. The room erupted into a cacophony of blame. They were screaming over each other, their voices overlapping in a symphony of denial. They blamed the banks, they blamed the glitch, they blamed everyone but themselves. And then it happened. There was a loud, audible click from the utility room in the basement. Instantly, the warm golden light of the crystal chandelier overhead vanished. The pot lights in the kitchen died. The hum of the sub-zero refrigerator ceased. The roaring fire in the gas fireplace sputtered and went out with a hiss as the electronic ignition valve shut down. Pitch-black darkness swallowed them whole. My mother screamed a high-pitched sound of pure terror. Harold froze in mid-step. The only light came from the gray winter light filtering through the snow-covered windows, casting long, ghostly shadows across the room. "What is happening?" Connor yelled, his voice cracking. "Why did the lights go out?" My father stood in the dark, his breathing heavy. "The electricity," he whispered. "The gas, the internet. It is all on a bundled plan." "So what?" Ebony snapped. So Harold continued, his voice trembling with a sudden, terrifying realization. "Jada set up the auto-pay on her personal card 3 years ago. We just pay her the difference every month." "It was easier that way," she said. The silence that followed was heavier than the darkness. The heat was already starting to dissipate. The cold from the uninsulated windows began to creep in, wrapping around their ankles. Ebony let out a laugh that sounded borderline hysterical. She walked to the window, looking out at the blizzard. "This is insane," she said, shaking her head. "You are telling me that Jada did this." Jada. The girl who buys her clothes at thrift stores. The girl who drives a 10-year-old sedan. The girl we just kicked out onto the street because she is a failure. She turned back to face the shadows of her family. How Ebony asked, her voice rising to a scream. "How does she have this kind of power? She is a data entry clerk. She is a nobody. We crushed her this morning. How is she crushing us from the grave?" No one answered her. The only sound was the wind howling outside, mocking them. They were standing in a $1 million house that was rapidly becoming a freezing tomb, and for the first time they realized that the nobody they had tormented was the one holding the keys to their survival. The house was silent, except for the hold music tinkling tinny and cheerful from Ebony's cell phone speaker. It was a stark contrast to the heavy, terrified breathing of the four people huddled around the mahogany coffee table. The daylight was fading fast, and with the power cut, the shadows in the room were growing longer, turning the familiar furniture into looming monsters. Ebony sat on the edge of the sofa, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. Her face was a mask of furious confusion. She was still trying to maintain the illusion of control. "It is just a security freeze," she told the room, her voice trembling slightly. "Banks do this all the time. It is probably because of that large transaction for the Botox. Once I verify my identity, they will turn everything back on." My father Harold nodded eagerly, grasping at the straw. "Exactly. It is a fraud protection algorithm. Nothing to worry about." The music stopped abruptly mid-measure. A click echoed through the speaker, followed by a voice that was not the friendly local branch manager they were used to. It was a voice from the risk management department, cold, professional, and utterly indifferent to their panic. "This is Mr. Henderson, in the Commercial Recovery Division. Am I speaking with Ebony Brooks, owner of Brooks Family Spa, LLC?" "Yes, this is she," Ebony answered, snapping back into her business persona. "Listen, Mr. Henderson, I am very unhappy with Ms. Brooks. I am not here to discuss customer satisfaction." The voice cut her off with the precision of a guillotine. "I am calling to inform you that your commercial loan facility has been flagged for immediate liquidation." Ebony blinked. "Liquidation? What are you talking about?" "We have never missed a payment. This is harassment. It has nothing to do with your payment history," Mr. Henderson explained, his tone dry and factual. "It has to do with your collateral structure. At 1:15 p.m. today, we received a formal status update from the primary guarantor on your loan, Ms. Jada Brooks." The name hung in the air like a curse. My mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. The representative continued. "The guarantor has reported a material adverse change in her circumstances. Specifically, she has reported that she has been evicted from her primary residence and is currently homeless. She also reported a termination of employment. Under Clause 14B of your lending agreement, a guarantor who lacks a fixed address or stable income renders the loan unsecured and high risk." Ebony opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to her father, then back to the phone. "Wait," Ebony stammered. "You are freezing my accounts because Jada is homeless." "Correct," Mr. Henderson said. "The bank cannot hold $1 million liability backed by a transient individual, therefore the risk protocol has been activated." "But that is ridiculous," Connor shouted, leaning toward the phone. "She is homeless because we kicked her out. We are the ones with the house. We are the ones with the business." There was a pause on the line, a long, heavy silence where the irony of the situation settled over them like a lead blanket. "Sir, I do not know who you are," Mr. Henderson said, his voice dropping a degree cooler, "but admitting that you intentionally destabilized your own guarantor is not helping your case. In fact, it suggests malicious intent, which accelerates the process." "What process?" Ebony whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "The demand for repayment," the representative stated. "Ms. Brooks, you are hereby notified that the full principal balance of the loan is now due. That is $1,200,000 plus accrued interest. You have 24 hours to wire the full amount to the suspense account listed in the email I just sent." 24 hours! Ebony screamed. "I do not have $1 million liquid. It is all tied up in equipment and the lease." "Then I suggest you liquidate those assets immediately," Mr. Henderson replied. "If the funds are not received by close of business tomorrow, we will move to foreclose on the secondary collateral, which I believe is listed as the residential property at 12 Oakwood Drive." My mother let out a low moan and slumped against my father. The house. They were coming for the house. "Have a good evening, Ms. Brooks." Click. The line went dead. The silence returned, but this time it was not empty. It was filled with the terrifying realization that their own cruelty had just rebounded and hit them with the force of a freight train. They had evicted me to teach me a lesson, and in doing so, they had signed their own eviction notice. The silence that followed the disconnection of the call was heavier than the freezing air slowly filling the room. The phone sat on the mahogany coffee table like a detonated bomb. The screen went black, reflecting the distorted, terrified faces of the 4 people sitting around it in the gathering gloom. For a long moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind rattling the windowpanes, a sound that used to mean safety and warmth, but now sounded like a mocking laughter. It was Harold who broke the silence first. He sank back into the armchair, his face gray in the fading light. He looked at his hands, the same hands that had signed the eviction paperwork just yesterday. "We did this," he whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "We actually did this. The bank didn't freeze the accounts because Jada made a mistake. They froze the accounts because we succeeded. We wanted her homeless. We wanted her to have no address. We wanted to strip her of her stability." He looked up at his family, his eyes wide with horror. "Do you understand? We pulled the trigger, but we didn't know the gun was pointed at our own heads. By making her unstable, we made the loan unstable. We destroyed our own credit rating to teach her a lesson." The realization hit them like a physical blow. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Every cruel word they had said to her, every text message to the landlord, every smug smile at breakfast, had been a step toward their own execution. But then the atmosphere in the room shifted. It did not shift toward regret. It did not shift toward remorse. It shifted toward a pure, white-hot rage. My mother Beatrice stood up. Her hands were shaking not from the cold, but from a venomous fury. She grabbed a crystal vase from the side table and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the fireplace, the sound exploding in the quiet house. "That ungrateful little wretch," Beatrice screamed, her face twisting into a mask of ugliness. She knew. She knew this would happen. She planned it. Mom Ebony stammered, looking at the shattered glass. "Do not be naive, Ebony," Beatrice hissed, turning on her daughter. "Jada has always been jealous of you. She has always been jealous of our happiness. She didn't fight the eviction. Did you notice that? She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She walked out of that apartment with a smile. She set us up. She wanted us to do this so she could destroy us." Connor jumped in his ego, desperate for a villain that wasn't himself. "She is a monster," he yelled, kicking the leg of the coffee table. "She is sitting somewhere laughing at us right now. She knew the terms of that loan. She knew Clause 14B. A normal person would have warned us. A normal sister would have said, 'Hey, if you kick me out, you lose your funding.' But she said nothing. She let us walk right into the trap." "It is evil," Ebony agreed, her shock replaced by indignation. "It is pure evil. We were just trying to help her grow up. We were trying to give her motivation, and she repays us by bankrupting the family business." They fed off each other's anger, rewriting history in real time. In their minds, they were no longer the aggressors who threw a woman into a blizzard. They were the victims of a calculated conspiracy. They forgot that they had initiated the violence. They forgot that they had cut her off. All they could see was that Jada had dared to let them face the consequences of their own actions. "She is trying to humiliate us," Harold growled, standing up and buttoning his cardigan against the chill. "She thinks she is smarter than us. She thinks she can win." "Well, she is wrong." Beatrice spat, her eyes gleaming with malice in the dark. "We are the Brooks family. We do not lose to the runt of the litter. She wants a war. Fine, we will find her, and we will force her to fix this." They stood together in the cold, dark room, united by their hatred, completely blind to the fact that the person they were hunting was no longer the prey. They were mice screaming at a lion, convinced they were still the cats. The temperature in the living room had dropped to 40 degrees. The expensive leather furniture was cold to the touch, and the breath of the Brooks family hung in the air like white smoke signals of their desperation. They were huddled around the flickering light of a single scented candle that Ebony had found in a drawer. The smell of vanilla was sickeningly sweet, mixed with the scent of fear. Ebony paced the room, her heels clicking frantically on the hardwood floor. She held her phone like a weapon, dialing Jada's number for the 50th time in the last 10 minutes. The call went straight to voicemail. Again. It was the automated operator voice. The customer you are calling has turned off their device or is out of the coverage area. Ebony screamed a raw sound of pure frustration and threw the phone onto the sofa cushions. She turned it off. Ebony yelled, "She knows we are calling. She is watching the missed calls pile up and she is laughing." Harold rubbed his hands together, trying to keep the circulation going. "Keep texting her," he commanded. "Do not stop. She has to look eventually." Ebony grabbed the phone back. Her fingers flew across the screen, typing out messages that swung wildly between vicious attacks and pathetic begging. First came the rage. "You are a selfish brat. You ruined this family. Pick up the phone or I will call the police." When those messages showed, delivered but not read, the tone shifted. The silence from Jada was a wall they could not break down, and it was terrifying them. The anger started to curdle into panic as the house grew colder. Ebony's thumbs trembled as she typed the next batch. "Jada, please pick up. Mom is freezing. We can fix this. Just call the bank and tell them it was a mistake. We will let you come back home. We will even let you stay in the guest room." Still nothing. The screen remained dark. No 3 dots indicating a reply. Just the void. Connor sat in the corner, still wearing his damp clothes, his eyes glued to his own phone. He wasn't texting her. He was stalking her. He was scrolling through her old social media posts, looking for a clue, a location, anything that would tell them where the ghost had gone. He scrolled past years of generic posts, pictures of coffee, pictures of books. The boring life of a boring girl, or so they thought. Then he stopped. His eyes narrowed. "Wait," Connor said, his voice rough. "I remember something." He tapped on the screen, pulling up an archived story from 2 years ago. It was from Jada's Instagram. She had put it on her close friends list, the one she used to share intimate thoughts with the people she thought loved her. Connor held the phone up. The screen glowed in the darkness, illuminating his pale face. "Look at this," he said. 2 years ago, she posted a picture of the lobby of the Peninsula Hotel, the one with the big golden chandeliers. She captioned it, "My dream escape. One day I will wake up here and never leave." Ebony squinted at the screen. "So what? That is the most expensive hotel in Chicago. Jada cannot afford a cup of tea there, let alone a room." Connor shook his head slowly, a look of dawning realization crossing his face. "Think about it, Ebony. She has been hiding money. We know that now. She just destroyed our credit with a snap of her fingers. If she wanted to celebrate, if she wanted to rub it in our faces, where would she go? She would go to the place she always dreamed of." He stood up, energized by the hunt. "She is there," Connor insisted. "I can feel it. She is at the Peninsula. She is spending her savings to pretend she is better than us." Harold stood up, buttoning his coat. It was a desperate lead, but it was the only one they had. "If she is there," Harold said, his voice hardening with resolve, "then we are going to go get her. We are going to drag her out of that hotel and march her down to the bank branch tomorrow morning to fix this mess." Ebony grabbed her purse. "She thinks she can hide in a palace while we freeze," she spat. "Let us see how smug she is when we show up at her door." They moved with a sudden unified purpose. They were not a family anymore. They were a pack of wolves, starving and cold, tracking the scent of the one who got away. The garage door of the Brooks estate would not open automatically since the power was out, so Connor and Harold had to heave it up manually. The metal groaned and screeched in protest, a fitting soundtrack for the humiliation that was about to unfold. Inside the cavernous 3-car garage, the space felt empty and accusing. The spot where Connor's Porsche Panamera used to sit was vacant, a rectangle of dry concrete, marking where his pride used to be. Ebony's Range Rover was there, but it was blocked in by the sheer amount of junk Harold had piled up, and with the electronic gate dead, they could not maneuver it out. That left only one option. Sitting in the far corner, covered in a layer of dust and old drop cloths, was Harold's work truck. It was a 20-year-old Ford F-150 that he kept for hauling mulch and lumber. It was rusted around the wheel wells. It smelled of gasoline and old fertilizer. It was a vehicle they usually apologized for having in the driveway. Now it was their chariot. Get in. Harold barked, his breath puffing in the freezing air. It is the only thing with four-wheel drive that can handle this storm. The four of them squeezed into the cab. It was a tight fit. Harold drove. Connor took the passenger seat. Beatrice and Ebony were forced to squeeze into the narrow back bench, usually reserved for toolboxes. Harold turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life with a deafening rattle that shook the entire frame. The muffler had rusted through years ago. Ebony wrinkled her nose. It smells like dead raccoons in here. Dad, turn on the heat. I can't feel my toes. Harold reached for the climate control knob and twisted it. A blast of air hit them, but it was not warm. It was ice cold. The heater core is busted, Harold muttered, slamming the truck into reverse. It has been broken for years. I never fixed it because I never drive this piece of junk in the winter. Great. Connor groaned, wrapping his arms around himself. Just great. We are going to freeze to death before we even get there. The drive into the city was a nightmare. The blizzard had turned the roads into sheets of black ice. The windshield wipers on the old truck were cracked and useless, smearing the snow rather than clearing it. Harold had to lean forward, his nose almost touching the glass, squinting to see the road ahead. Inside the cab, the atmosphere was toxic. They were pressed against each other, sharing the same freezing air, forcing them to smell the fear and sweat on each other. "You are driving too fast!" Harold Beatrice shrieked from the back seat as the truck fishtailed slightly on an overpass. "I am driving 30 miles an hour. Beatrice, shut up. Harold snapped back, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Ebony stared out the window at the passing headlights. Every other car on the road seemed to be a warm, comfortable SUV. She saw families laughing inside. She saw heated seats. She saw stability. "Look at us," Ebony whispered, her voice bitter. "Look at what she has reduced us to. We are the Brooks family. We are supposed to be in a limousine. And here we are crammed into a rust bucket, shivering like refugees." "It is temporary," Connor said through chattering teeth, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "Once we find her, once we force her to sign the release papers, we will be back on top. We will buy a new fleet of cars tomorrow." They merged onto Michigan Avenue. The city lights were glowing ahead, blurred by the storm. The towering skyscrapers looked like jagged teeth against the night sky. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, Jada was waiting. Harold navigated the truck through the slush, the engine backfiring loudly as they approached the Gold Coast. The contrast was painful. They passed Prada, they passed Cartier, and then finally they saw it. The Peninsula Hotel. It rose up like a golden palace, its windows glowing with warmth and luxury. A line of Bentleys and Rolls-Royces was idling in the valet lane. And then there was them. The rusted, loud, dirty pickup truck chugging smoke, carrying a family that had lost everything except their audacity. Harold pulled up behind a pristine white Ferrari, the brakes of the truck squealing loudly enough to make the valet attendants flinch. They had arrived. But they did not look like guests. They looked like the help, or worse. They looked like desperate people who had nowhere else to go. The arrival of the Ford F-150 at the main entrance of the peninsula was not just an entrance, it was a collision of two different worlds. The truck lurched forward one last time, the suspension groaning loudly under the weight of 4 adults crammed into the cab. As Harold slammed on the brakes, the rusted brake pads let out a high-pitched screech that pierced the sophisticated silence of the hotel driveway. To make matters worse, the engine gave a final dying shudder and backfired with a loud bang that sounded like a gunshot, causing a lady in a mink coat to drop her Chanel clutch in fright. Silence descended on the valet area. It was not the respectful silence of awe. It was the awkward, horrified silence of people witnessing a disaster. Harold pushed open the heavy driver's side door. It creaked loudly, resisting him. He stepped out onto the heated pavement, his golf cleats clicking absurdly on the stone. He tried to straighten his jacket, but it was wrinkled from the cramped ride, and he smelled faintly of the old fertilizer bags that had been in the back seat. Valet Harold announced, tossing the keys toward the attendant. "Keep it up front. We will not be staying long." The valet, a young man in a pristine white uniform, stared at the keys in midair. He caught them with 2 fingers as if they were covered in slime. He looked at the truck, which was dripping dirty slush onto the immaculate driveway. He looked at the duct tape holding the side mirror together. "Sir," the valet said, his voice polite but strained. "We usually reserve the front drive for exotic vehicles. I can park this in the lower garage for you." "Just park the damn truck!" Harold snapped, his face flushing red. Meanwhile, the rest of the family was spilling out of the clown car. Connor tumbled out of the passenger side, shivering violently. He was wearing a thin designer t-shirt and jeans soaked from his earlier encounter with the tow truck. His lips were blue. Beatrice and Ebony crawled out from the back bench. Ebony's hair, usually a perfect curtain of silk, was frizzy and damp. Her mascara had run, leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. Beatrice looked shell-shocked, clutching her purse to her chest, as if she expected to be mugged. They stood there in a huddle, a shivering, wet mass of humanity, surrounded by the gleaming chrome of Rolls-Royces and the polished paint of Ferraris. "Let us go inside," Ebony hissed, grabbing her mother's arm. "Everyone is staring." They hurried toward the revolving doors. As they pushed through the glass, the transition was physical. The biting cold and the smell of exhaust were instantly replaced by a wave of warmth scented with fresh orchids and expensive timber, but the relief was short-lived. As they stepped onto the marble floor of the lobby, the true weight of their situation hit them. The Peninsula lobby was a cathedral of golden light. A string quartet was playing Mozart in the corner. Men in bespoke suits sat in velvet armchairs sipping cognac. Women in evening gowns and jewels laughed softly by the fireplace. And then there was the Brooks family. They stood near the entrance, dripping dirty water onto the polished floor. They looked like refugees from a disaster zone who had stumbled into a royal ball. The conversation in the nearest seating area stopped. Heads turned, eyes scanned them up and down. There was no sympathy in those gazes. There was only judgment. The kind of judgment that the Brooks family used to dispense to others but had never tasted themselves. Ebony saw a woman she recognized from the charity gala circuit sitting near the window. The woman looked at Ebony, then looked at her damp clothes and ruined makeup. She did not wave. She simply turned her head away and took a sip of her tea, pretending she had seen nothing at all. That rejection cut deeper than the cold wind. "Where is the front desk?" Connor muttered, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "I need to yell at someone." They marched toward the reception desk, their footsteps squelching slightly. They were angry. They were humiliated. But mostly they were terrified because for the first time in their lives, they were the ones who did not belong. The receptionist was politely trying to tell Harold that he could not shout in the lobby when a soft musical chime silenced the room. It came from the far wall, away from the main bank of elevators. These were the private lifts, the ones reserved for the penthouse suites and the highest tier of guests. The door slid open with a whisper. The woman who stepped out did not walk, she glided. She was draped in a gown of crimson silk that flowed over her body like liquid fire. The fabric was impeccable, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers and rippling with every step she took. She wore diamond studs in her ears that sparkled like captured stars, and her hair was pulled back in a sleek, modern bun that emphasized the sharp, elegant line of her jaw. For a moment, nobody moved. The guests in the lobby stopped their conversations to admire the vision of wealth and power that had just entered the room. It took the Brooks family 5 full seconds to realize who they were looking at. Connor dropped his phone. Ebony's mouth fell open, her jaw unhinging in genuine shock. Beatrice clutched her husband's wet sleeve so hard her knuckles turned white. It was Jada. But it was not the Jada they knew. It was not the girl in the oversized sweaters and the scuffed sneakers. It was not the girl who looked down at the floor when they spoke to her. This was a stranger wearing Jada's face. This was a woman who owned the air around her. The contrast between the two sides was violent. On one side stood the family. They were a huddled, shivering mess. Harold's jacket was stained with grease from the truck. Connor's lips were blue and his hair was plastered to his forehead. Ebony's makeup was a smear of black tears, and Beatrice looked like a frightened wet cat. They smelled of damp wool exhaust fumes and desperation. They were dripping dirty slush onto the white marble floor, leaving a puddle of squalor wherever they stood. On the other side stood Jada. She was dry, she was warm, she smelled of expensive sandalwood and fresh jasmine. Her skin was glowing with the kind of health that comes from sleeping in Egyptian cotton sheets and eating food prepared by Michelin star chefs. She looked like a statue carved from gold, while they looked like mud that had been tracked in from the street. Jada paused at the top of the small staircase that led down to the main seating area. She scanned the room with a lazy, bored expression until her eyes landed on the group of refugees by the desk. She did not flinch. She did not look surprised. A slow, cold smile spread across her red lips. It was the smile of a predator who sees a trap snap shut. She descended the stairs, the silk of her dress hissing softly against the stone. She walked straight toward them, not hurrying, taking her time, letting them soak in every detail of her perfection. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough for them to feel the heat radiating from her, but far enough to maintain the boundary between the clean and the unclean. She looked at her father's muddy shoes. She looked at her sister's ruined hair. She looked at her brother's shivering hands. "Hello, family." Jada said, her voice smooth and rich like melted chocolate. "You look terrible. Did you walk here?" The sound of her voice snapped the spell. The shock turned into a wave of confusing emotions, shame, anger, but mostly a terrifying sense of inferiority. For the first time in their lives, they were the ugly ones. They were the poor ones. And the girl they had called a failure was looking down at them from a height they could never reach. The lobby of the peninsula was usually a place of hushed whispers and polite laughter, but Ebony shattered that peace instantly. She stepped forward, her wet boots squeaking on the marble, and pointed a shaking finger at Jada's face. The shock had worn off, replaced by the raw panic of a drowning woman who sees the lifeguard drinking a cocktail. "You have to fix this!" Ebony screamed, her voice cracking and echoing off the high ceilings. "You have to call the bank right now. Pick up your phone and tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you have money. You killed me, Jada. Do you hear me? You killed my business." Security guards near the entrance took a step forward, but Jada raised a single elegant hand, stopping them in their tracks. She did not look frightened. She looked bored. She looked at Ebony's trembling finger as if it were a dirty insect she wanted to flick away. "Lower your voice," Ebony, Jada said softly. "You are disturbing the guests. And frankly, you look hysterical." "I am hysterical," Ebony yelled, tears streaming down her face, mixing with the black streaks of mascara. "They froze everything. They are taking the house. They are taking the cars. They said you are unstable. They said you are homeless. But look at you. You are wearing a dress that costs more than my rent. You are a liar." Jada laughed. It was a dark, low sound that sent a shiver through the room. "I am not a liar," Jada replied. "I am a realist, and I am a very obedient sister." She took a step closer, towering over Ebony in her heels. "You are the one who told me I needed a reality check." Jada continued, her voice dripping with sweet poison. "You stood in that kitchen and told me I was stagnant. You said I needed tough love. You said throwing me out onto the street was for my own good because it would force me to grow up. Well, here we are." She gestured to her red silk dress and then to the muddy floor. "I am doing exactly what you wanted. I am living my truth. Technically, I have no fixed address. Technically, I was evicted this morning. I am just a homeless, unemployed woman trying to survive in a big city. And a homeless woman has no business guaranteeing $1 million loan for a luxury spa." But you have money, Connor shouted, stepping up beside Ebony, his teeth chattering. We checked the records. You have $12 million. You could pay off the loan right now and not even feel it. Jada turned her cold gaze to Connor. That is my personal capital, she said. That belongs to Jada Brooks, the private citizen. But Jada Brooks, the guarantor, is a different person. She is the person you created. She is the person you kicked out. And sadly, she is insolvent. She looked back at Ebony, who was sobbing quietly now. You wanted me to hit rock bottom, Jada whispered, leaning in close so only they could hear. You wanted me to feel the cold. So I let the bank know that I was out in the cold. I just gave you the same tough love you gave me. Why are you crying? I thought this was what you wanted. I thought we were teaching each other lessons. Ebony looked up into her sister's eyes and saw no mercy there. She saw only a mirror reflecting her own cruelty back at her, magnified 1,000 times. You are a monster, Ebony whispered. No, Jada corrected, straightening up and smoothing the silk of her dress. I am just a good student, and you were excellent teachers. Now if you will excuse me, I have a reservation at the restaurant. I hear the lobster is excellent tonight. You should probably go. You are getting mud on the carpet. She turned her back on them, the red silk swirling around her ankles, and walked away, leaving them standing in the puddle of their own making. I paused at the foot of the stairs and turned back to face them. There was one final nail I needed to hammer into this coffin. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope. I did not hand it to them. I tossed it onto the low marble table between us, where it landed with a dull thud, sliding across the polished surface. The flap fell open, spilling glossy photographs like a deck of poisonous cards. They were high-definition shots. Connor kissing a blonde girl named Amber in the front seat of the Porsche. Connor buying diamond watches. But the real kill shot was the bank statement underneath. It highlighted a series of wire transfers totaling $200,000 moved from the spa's operating fund directly into Connor's private gambling account. You think my status update bankrupted you? Jada said, her voice cutting through the silence. The business was dead months ago. Your husband has been embezzling the operating capital since June. Ebony picked up a photo, her hands shaking so hard the paper rattled. She looked from the image to Connor. Her face went slack as the last shred of her denial evaporated. Connor turned the color of old ash, opening and closing his mouth like a fish on dry land, unable to form a single lie to save himself. The silence following the revelation of Connor's theft was broken by a sound even more pathetic than Ebony's sobbing. It was the sound of my father's dignity shattering. Harold Brooks, the man who had ordered me off his property hours ago, crumpled. He did not just apologize. He sank to his knees on the cold marble floor, his wet trousers soaking up the slush. My mother joined him, clutching the hem of my red dress like a beggar. Jada! Please, baby, look at us! Beatrice wailed, looking up with mascara-stained eyes. We are your flesh and blood. We raised you. We fed you when you were helpless. You cannot let us lose the house. Think of all the sacrifices we made for you. They were weeping now, ugly, desperate tears. It was a performance, a last-ditch effort to use guilt as a currency because they had no real money left. I took a sharp step back, pulling my silk skirt away from their grasping hands as if they were contagious. I looked down at them with the clinical detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. Sacrifices, Jada repeated, her voice slicing through their noise. Do not talk to me about value. You put a price tag on our relationship this morning. It was $700. You threw your own daughter out into a negative 20-degree blizzard because I was short on rent. That is exactly what I am worth to you. $700. And now that the bill is due, you want a discount. I am sorry, but I do not negotiate with people who leave me to freeze. I had seen enough of this pathetic display. The tears, the kneeling, the sudden rediscovery of parental love, it was all too little and far too late. I caught the eye of the head of security who had been hovering discreetly near a marble pillar. I gave him a single sharp nod. "Please escort these individuals off the property," I said, my voice carrying no anger, just fatigue. "They are not guests of the hotel and they are disturbing the peace." Two burly guards in dark suits stepped forward immediately. They hoisted my father up by his armpits and grabbed Connor by the collar of his wet jacket. My mother let out a sharp cry as she was pulled to her feet. "Wait!" I called out one last time as they were being dragged toward the revolving doors. They stopped, looking back with a glimmer of hope in their eyes, thinking perhaps I had found mercy. I walked over to them and smiled. "Do not waste time crying here. You are going to need that energy for the packing. Since the loan is in default, the bank has accelerated the foreclosure on your house. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before the sheriff arrives to change the locks. I suggest you hurry. It is a long walk back in the snow." The flashing blue lights of the sheriff's cruisers reflected harshly off the glass storefront of what used to be the Brooks family spa. It was 10 in the morning, and the foreclosure team was already putting the padlock on the front door. Ebony stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in a coat that she technically no longer owned, watching her empire dissolve into legal red tape. She looked small and broken, shivering in the cold wind, while the officers pasted a bright orange seized property notice on the glass. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb, purring softly. The back door opened, and I stepped out holding a leather portfolio. I walked past the crying receptionist and the confused officers straight to where my sister was standing. "You cannot be here," Ebony sobbed, her voice hoarse from a sleepless night. "This is a crime scene. Go away, Jada." "Actually, I have every right to be here," I said, pulling a crisp document from my folder. "I am the owner of this building. My company, JB Holdings, purchased the distressed mortgage on this property yesterday afternoon. That makes me your landlord." Ebony stared at me, her eyes wide with horror as the pieces fell into place. She realized I had not just frozen her accounts, I had bought the ground beneath her feet. I held up the commercial lease agreement, the piece of paper that gave her the right to operate here. I looked her dead in the eye. "And as the new landlord, I have a strict policy against tenants with poor credit ratings and history of fraud." I ripped the contract down the middle, the sound sharp and final in the cold air. I tore it again and let the pieces fall into the snow at her feet, mixing with the slush. "You are evicted, Ebony. Get off my property." The radiator in the cramped studio apartment hissed and sputtered, but it produced no heat, only a faint smell of rust and old water. Harold and Beatrice sat at a wobbly folding table, their coats buttoned up to their chins. The room was a concrete box in the social housing complex, a grim reality far removed from the velvet armchairs of Oakwood. There was no Connor to boast about his empire today. He was sitting in a 6x8 cell at Cook County Jail facing felony charges for embezzlement. There was no Ebony to preen about her success. She had filed for divorce the moment the handcuffs went on, and was now sleeping on a friend's couch, refusing to answer her parents' calls. Harold opened a tin of cold beans, the metal lid scraping loudly in the silence. He scooped a spoonful into his mouth, chewing slowly. The taste was metallic and bland. His eyes drifted to the peeling paint on the wall, but his mind was back at the mahogany dining table from 2 nights ago. He could almost taste the rosemary roasted prime rib and the expensive Cabernet. He remembered the laughter. He remembered toasting to getting rid of the dead weight. He looked at his wife, her face gray and hollow in the dim light. They had celebrated destroying their daughter to save a few dollars. Now, as they shivered in the dark eating food fit for a bunker, they realized that the dead weight they had cut loose was the only thing that had been keeping them afloat. The gentle hum of the twin jet engines was the only sound in the private first-class suite on Emirates Flight 235. It was a white noise that sounded like peace. I reclined the leather seat all the way back until it formed a perfect bed, wrapped in a duvet that felt like a cloud. Through the double-paned window, I could see the curvature of the earth. We were cruising at 40,000 feet, leaving the gray, frozen landscape of Chicago far behind. Down there, buried under layers of snow and regret, My family was likely fighting over a tin of beans in a cold room. Up here, the sun was shining so brightly it hurt to look at it directly. I reached out and picked up the crystal flute of Dom Perignon from the marble side table. The condensation was cool against my fingertips. I swirled the golden liquid, watching the bubbles rise and burst, just like the illusions my family had lived under for so years. They had built a life on debt and arrogance, convinced they were untouchable kings and queens. They never realized that the castle was made of sand, and I was the tide. I took a sip, letting the vintage champagne wash away the last lingering taste of their betrayal. It felt strange to be this light. For decades I had carried the heavy weight of their expectations. I had carried their debts. I had carried their insults. I had walked around with my shoulders hunched, trying to make myself smaller, trying to fit into the tiny box they had built for me. But the box was gone now. I had burned it to ash. The flight attendant, a woman with a kind smile and a pristine uniform, stepped softly into my suite. "Ms. Brooks, would you like anything else before we begin our descent into Mail? The pilot informs us the weather in the Maldives is a perfect 85 degrees with clear skies." "No thank you," I said, giving her a genuine smile. "I have everything I need right here." She nodded and withdrew, closing the sliding privacy door. I was alone again in my golden cocoon. I looked out the window at the endless expanse of blue sky. I thought about my mother's voice screaming at me in the lobby. I thought about Ebony's tear-stained face. They had tried to frame their cruelty as a lesson. They called it tough love. They said they wanted to push me to the edge so I would finally wake up. They wanted me to hit rock bottom to change. I let out a soft laugh that was lost in the hum of the cabin. Well, they got their wish. I did change. I stopped being the victim they could kick around, and I became the architect of their destruction. I took the stones they threw at me, and I built a fortress they could not breach. They wanted to teach me a lesson about the real world, but they forgot that in the real world, the person with the capital makes the rules. I became their nightmare, the silent, invisible force that dismantled their lives while they slept. And now, while they are living in the reality they created for themselves, I am flying toward paradise. I reached into my bag and pulled out my oversized black sunglasses. I slid them onto my face, blocking out the glare of the sun and blocking out the memories of the people who shared my DNA, but not my heart. I am done with lessons. I am done with guilt. I raised my glass one last time to the empty suite. Here is to Rock Bottom family. I hope you find it comfortable down there, because the view from the top is absolutely breathtaking. I drank the wine and closed my eyes, letting the motion of the plane rock me into a dreamless sleep as we flew toward the equator. I was finally free, and I was never looking back. This story teaches us that true power does not need to be loud. Jada's family mistook her silence for weakness, and her humility for failure, never realizing that the dead weight they tried to cut loose was actually the anchor keeping them afloat. They thought they could break her by pushing her to rock bottom, but they forgot that rock bottom is where the strongest foundations are built. The ultimate lesson is to never underestimate the person you mistreat, because the hand you bite today might be the only one holding the keys to your survival tomorrow. If you believe that silence is the ultimate weapon and success is the coldest form of revenge, hit that subscribe button right now. Join our community and let's prove that the underdog doesn't just survive, they conquer.